Okay, so it is now the 27th, or the 28th, the Monday at 7 o'clock. We are now going to dial into the ministry's office to have a little chat. Okay, so they're probably waiting for me. I'm a little slow. 1, 8, 6, 6, 6, 0, 2, 5, 4, 2, 3. On speaker.
Welcome to the Ontario Public Service Audio Conferencing System. Please enter your conference ID followed by pound. Thank you. The moderator has not yet joined the conference. If you are the moderator, please press star now.
And we will wait. Obviously it's 10 o'clock and they're not prepared.
The moderator has not yet joined the conference. Please stand by.
Turn the volume down. So, we'll give it 10-15 minutes, at which time I will hang up and go to work. Well, actually what I'll do is I'll phone Brian first. And I will do so from my other phone. David Hurd.
You will now be placed into the conference. David Hurd.
Hello?
Good morning. Hi, Brian's here.
Okay. Are we waiting on the other side still?
We're here.
Okay.
Oh, is everyone in? Yes, David, we're here. Hi, David. Hi, Christina. Hi, Brian. Brian's here. So your side's all here? Yes, sir, we are. Okay, we're ready to go? We're ready to go. Good. I'll start then. Just again to introduce myself. My name is Brian Bisnaire. I'm a mediator and Information and Privacy Commissioner and be facilitating sort of our discussion today. I'd first like to thank everyone for participating. I think it's good to see this big a turnout, and it shows a commitment on all parts to work together and a willingness to work towards a resolution. One of the things I find in the mediation is that it's to follow our sort of informal process. It's good to use first names, so feel free to call me Brian, and if that's okay with everyone to use first names. Absolutely, that's great with us. Sure. So first maybe we'll just go around. We don't necessarily have a table here, but if we could just go and have everyone introduce themselves. Maybe David, you could start, and then the people from the ministry.
Yeah, okay. Well, my name's David Hurd, and we all know why I'm here. I'm sitting at home in my living room right now, but I'm a federal employee with the Department of Human Resources and Skills Development. We keep changing our name, so if I get confused, don't mind me. Yes, and anyways, like I say, today we're here just to find out, why. So that's all I have to say.
Maybe we just go around and introduce ourselves first, and then we'll get back to your opening statement, David.
Yep.
Who else do we have from your side, Christina?
Well, myself, Christina, from Freedom of Information here at the Ministry, and Kate Parker, also from Freedom of Information.
Okay, if everyone could maybe just quickly just say their title as well for David's purposes.
Yep. Kate Parker, Manager, Renewal Strategies Office.
Okay.
Christina Brunel, I'm the Policy Analyst in Freedom of Information.
My name's Tanya Weber-Kinch. I'm the manager of the Autism Team, Specialized Services and Supports Branch.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Susan Capling. I'm Director of the Specialized Services and Supports Branch at the Ministry.
Hi there, my name is John Carberry. I'm Acting Manager of the Client Services Branch. Douglas. I'm the director of the ministry's Client Services branch.
I'm Mary Pankowski from Legal Services at the Ministry.
Cindy Crandall from Legal Services branch.
Okay, great. So I think that's everyone that's participating. I'm just going to take a few minutes now from my side to do sort of my introduction, maybe set the ground rules for what today is. I mean, as everyone knows, this is where I work. The Information Privacy Commissioner's final level of appeal for matters where requests are made under the Freedom of Information Act. Obviously, starts with the request by the appellant. If the ministry issues a decision, the appellant then has that right to appeal that decision to our office. Just to jump ahead of it, as you may know, the final decision-making authority in our office is the adjudicator. So after my sort of level, there is an adjudicator that's assigned to a file. That individual also works in our office, but has the authority to make an order. So they have order-making capabilities where they can order the disclosure of records, where they can confirm the decision made by the ministry. But before we usually get to an adjudicator and that more formal process, and I just point out again that adjudicating process is done by way of written submissions. So an adjudicator would be assigned, but that individual wouldn't actually call the parties, and there'd be no oral hearing. People would send in their written submissions. After reading the written submissions, they would make a final decision. But before we get to that, we have the mediation process, where someone like myself is assigned. It's a little more informal process, where it gives the parties a chance to discuss the issues on the phone, maybe clarify the issues. And in my opinion, I think it's a much more sort of rewarding process that allows us to discuss the file, and there's a few advantages. I mean, some of the advantages are we can just clarify the nature of the request so that everybody's clear on what the appellant is searching for. It gives the opportunity for the ministry or the institution to provide maybe a more detailed explanation of why records don't exist or how records are filed, so why it takes long, how to search for them, and along those lines. And one of the also sort of other advantages, I think it helps to in a more formal process, build future relationships so people can ask questions and build up a trust between the parties. Okay, so the objectives of the mediation, there's no sort of formal schedule or formal objective, but I think one of the outcomes is we are working towards sort of a resolution and finding something that may be satisfactory to David as a result. But obviously that could lead to a couple other options. We may have to go away in different directions to maybe find other individuals that are helpful in the process, or it could involve maybe asking David to put in new requests, maybe with different wording along those lines. Okay, just a quick point of what our role of our office, that's what we can do. There's certain things we can't do. Obviously, the role of our office is access to information and access to records as they exist. It's not the role of our office, for example, to do an evaluation of the Autism Intervention Program, and we don't necessarily, we don't make rulings on what, institutions maybe could have done differently or ought to do, but the focus is clear on access to records that are available. Okay? So the structure for today, what we'll do is we'll start, I think each side will come up with a brief introduction of what their position is, outline what they're looking for, and we can take it from there. Just a quick rule on ground rules, if we could, for the mediation. I find these a little more difficult on the phone than face-to-face, but if you make it a rule that sort of only one person speaks at a time, allow the other person to finish before jumping in, obviously keeping our voices at a level and a civil sort of discussion, and we'll take it from there. Anyone have any quick questions just about the process or anything?
I'm good.
Good, okay. And then what we set aside, I think we've set aside about an hour. Hopefully we can accomplish it in that. I'm definitely available for longer than that, but I think that's our structure, and maybe that can help us keep that in mind as a structure to take it from there. So what I'd like to do now maybe is if we could start with David, and if David would want to start with sort of an opening statement. David, if you could let us maybe a little background, focus on what the request is, and maybe also give a little bit about what you maybe expect, as an outcome today or what you're looking for. So David, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, a little background. I have a 6-year-old son with autism, number one. Number two, I had met with the program director here in my region in the spring, and we had a few contentious moments, And she had piped up and said that she has always gotten glowing reviews and evaluations. So, having said that, I told her that I intended to follow up on her claim, and not just to pinpoint or go after her region alone, but to take a look and see what was going on across the board. So, having done that, using the guideline, I put forward a request for information. And basically, well, I didn't feel I got what I was looking for. And when you look at, the question that was asked, I didn't print it off and bring it home with me. I'm not doing this from my office. I'm doing it at my home, so I have no conflict of interest with my employer. Basically, the question came down to, I would like to see the evaluation reports for the 9 DSOs. And, of course, I did not receive them, which brought us to this point here. That's it in a nutshell.
So that brings us to where we are today. And David, in terms of an outcome or a best case outcome, what would...
I can't say because I don't know where we're going to go. I can't say because I don't know where this discussion is going to go. The program's been around a number of years, and we shouldn't have to be doing this, I don't believe. I think this is something that should have been taken care of a while ago.
Okay, well thanks, David. I think just to review then what we've had. So what David made a request back in February to the ministry. Initially he had a number of items that were listed there, but then the decision was modified in terms of there were 2 sort of points to the request, an A and a B. And one was for the sort of evaluations or a general summary of the overall program, I guess, and then the second point was that evaluations for the specific regions. And my understanding with discussions with David before this is he's looking for some documents that would outline how those evaluations were monitored. And then the ministry issued its decision, providing him the one document, but no documents as far as the evaluation. So maybe at this point from your side, Christina, does the ministry have some sort of comments on the evaluations for those programs? Is there something they could add to that?
Hi, it's Susan Capling talking. So I think what might be useful, especially given the helpful context that David has just given us, it helps to situate his request a bit more, is to talk to you a bit about what we do and take it from there.
Okay.
So just to summarize, what we do with the 9 providers, and I'm going to ask my colleague Greg Douglas to jump in if I get this a little bit wrong, if you want to clarify a bit. So we monitor the 9 regional providers, so those are the AIP providers, including CHEO, by way of service contracts and monitoring their compliance with the program guidelines, so that would be the AIP program guidelines. And in terms of how we look at delivery of the Autism Intervention Program in the 9 regions, we do monitor the AIP delivery through the collection and analysis of monthly and quarterly service data. And I believe that some of that monthly and quarterly service data is what we provided in response to David's request. And so you can see that there's a range of data in there which is helpful for us for program and policy thinking. And we do monitor IBI research itself and what we know from a research perspective about IBI and its effectiveness. So that's sort of generally 3 kinds of things we do at a high level. We don't conduct evaluations of the 9 regional offices themselves or the AIP providers as a regular business practice. So that's kind of a high-level summary of what we do to understand what goes on in the AIP.
Okay, well, thank you. That's helpful. So that the evaluations aren't broken down into the 9 regions. Is that correct? Okay. Well, I think from my perspective, from one of the things that David and I discussed was the thing that we found on the Autism Intervention Program Guideline revision. And then I pulled a copy off the internet. And one of the things it had as the conclusion was under a heading of evaluations. It said the Ministry of Children and Youth Services is committed to monitoring the Autism Intervention Program to determine the way it achieves goals and objectives and makes efficient use of public resources. Systematic processes and outcome evaluations will be done periodically by the ministry and the results reported. The question I had is those results that are reported and the outcome evaluations, is that a document that exists, or there's documents? Is that more for the whole program rather than the regions?
So I think I would just come back to there isn't sort of one perfect document, if you like, or 9 documents for each region that we would call an evaluation, but rather sort of the key kinds of activities that I took you through are the way that we monitor and understand what's going on with the program.
So this key evaluation.
Yeah.
So what was provided to David is sort of all there is there more details, or are there backgrounds to those reports, or?
Pretty much got it.
Let's take a look at this.
Are there other records, speaking in the FOI process sort of terminology, are there other records that could also be provided, or are there other documents that exist that may address those issues?
It's Greg speaking. We do collect data on the number of clients served, that kind of stuff, and we, as Susan said, we get it on a quarterly basis. That's one way of collecting data, and that has to do with the service contract we have with organizations like CHEO and the other 8, and in that contract it stipulates what data we will collect on a quarterly basis. So we have an information management system where we get the data, and it's whatever it says in the contract is the data we collect, which was provided to David in his last request. In addition to that, from time to time we ask for additional information just to enhance the data, but again it's usually about, or it is about the numbers of kids served, those kinds of things. So there's ad hoc data requests. So those reports do come in to us in Toronto, and we roll them up, we analyze them, we roll them up, and we create the story or the report that we share with our senior management, which was the information and the data that we provided to David in his original request. Does that help?
How's that, David? Do you have any comments on that, or?
Yeah, first of all, I don't believe the data falls in line with the program objectives, because when you look at this program, there's 2 sides to this program. There's a business side to it, and there's the clinical side to it. Okay, first, number 1. On the business side of this program, you have to have some type of monitoring. And of course, your figures that you provided me are all quantitative. They do not prove quality. Are we getting value for our money? Are children being properly served? Your numbers show, for example, your numbers will show the number of kids who had entered the program and the number of kids who had left. It doesn't tell you how many children have actually succeeded through the program, or those who have been cut off early. Okay? So these figures that you have are not very good. Another thing, you don't do any regional analysis, again, of the programs. You don't show... I see no evidence of best practices that you can derive from the data that you have. On the clinical side of things, I'll talk about that after. But really, it would seem that this is from me looking in, okay? The ministry does not understand IBI or ABA or autism based on the fact that you seem to use the argument that when it comes to issues of clinical matter, you pass that off to those who are paid to provide the service. Again, the documentation. Now, this is one thing, the evaluations, the regional evaluations. That when my son left the program, I asked for the exit evaluation. He was denied. I'm the one who went to the NDP and said, they're denying my son a final evaluation. Now, having said that, I know of other parents who have been denied final evaluations. Now, if you were monitoring the program, you would have known these evaluations weren't taking place. So, you failed to ensure your primary purpose of the Act, which is to look out for the best interest and the well-being of the children. So, again, the LaRose, we're going to bring this up again, because I'm going to point to another issue here, that a contentious issue, but it should have set off a flag to you. There was the LaRose submission, the RFP. Okay, in that RFP, she identified that a lot of documentation regarding data collection of these kids was not being performed. Yet you signed the RFP. That should have set off a flag saying, whoa, something's not right. We're paying the region to do these jobs, and they're not doing them properly. I even have an email from the CEO of CHEO telling me that if we had to start providing the final assessments that we're required to, we will have to start cutting funding elsewhere in the program. Now, again, you would have been aware had you set up a proper recording model that you could actually bring in, look at the data coming back and say what's going on in this region versus that region. Why are kids lasting 6 months in a program in one region? Why are kids on for 3 years in another? Why are kids not succeeding in the West and exceeding in the East? Simple metrics. You don't need to be a clinical psychologist to figure this out. It's just simple numbers. So, again, the figures that you provided me do not prove quality of service. The fact that you have a number of therapists out there, that's great. You've got therapists everywhere. But what's their level of experience? You know, how many man years or person years does a particular region have? I mean, a northern region where they're not going to have a lot of resources, they're going to have new kids coming out of university and college going in there, they'll have minimal experience, they're going to do the best they can. Toronto, you're going to have all sorts of people with lots of experience, multiple years of experience. That's going to impact regionally how the program is delivered and how effective it is. Again, what you failed to do is prove quality, and you failed to live up to the primary purpose of the Act. So that's my point. The clinical side of things, again, you know, if you're going to rely on the clinicians to do the job, then you have to ensure that the clinicians are capable of delivering the services that they provide. You need to do that by checking their references, checking their, are they well published? Are they even published at all, as in the case of the one I have here? Like I say, and what are they? You got to make sure that everything that's being done, because you are looking after the children in this province, you have to make sure that what these people who are treating are doing what is ethically right, and not for the dollar that's being offered through the province. Again, you have to ensure the quality, and by not doing so, you fail to look after the best interests of these children. And that's my point. That's all I have to say about the matter. You have to practice what the Act preaches, and you have to live up to the primary purpose of that Act. That's my rant. You got to remember, I'm emotional about this because I'm affected by the children. By a child with autism. And you've got to realize, too, that you have people inside your provincial government with autism as well. And that's the thing I've found. I've found other federal employees who are also affected by this program. The beauty of it is, I have a unique job, whereas most of them are pigeonholed in a small little corner of the world. Yeah. So, as I say, you have failed to live up to the primary purpose of the Act, because you're not really monitoring this program. You're just feeding it cash. And then what you get in return from these stats, that are these bar graphs that you sent me back, is the number of kids who've gone in and the number of children who have come out. That's it. Proves no quality. And important to your document according to your document here, the IEP guidelines, where is it here? Right underneath the objectives. Number 4, demonstrate measurable gains and achievement of identified goals. And we all know that the goal is to provide high quality. Quality is measured not by quantity. You have failed to live up to your act. You've had 10 years to do the evaluations, and you have failed to do so. And now, we're now into what? The guideline came up in 2006. We're about to come on to 2012, and yet the evaluations have still not begun. It was brought to your attention in April when I filed my initial complaint. And as far as I know, you haven't done anything about it since, other than the Senate director saying you must do final evaluations. Am I wrong?
What I hear David saying is that he's looking, making the distinction between, quantity and quality, and maybe ask the ministry, if that's right, David, are there records that would maybe capture
the quality
records that exist that could be provided under the Act, that address that more qualitative aspect? Is that something that someone on the ministry could address, or is that?
Well, it's part of the Act, and it follows it's part of the guideline, and it follows in line with the Act to provide the, look out for the best interest and well-being. I see nothing here that proves that. Nothing at all.
Hi, it's Susan here. So I think, David, you made a couple of points. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to address them all. But just a couple of things that might be helpful for you. So we have funded some studies on IBI delivered through the program that have been published in academic journals that talk from an academic perspective about the effectiveness of IBI in a large community-based program, and we can give you those references if you find them helpful to look at. One of the articles, again, is called Effectiveness of IBI in a Large Community-Based Program. It's by a professor at York named Adrienne Perry. You may be familiar with her. And the second one is about predictors of outcome for children receiving IBI, again, in a large community-based program. So those studies do speak a little bit to effectiveness of IBI and more qualitative issues rather than quantitative. The other point I would make is about really how the ministry is set up and runs the Autism Intervention Program, and it's just, you probably already know this, David, but of course it's delivered through the 9 regional programs who are transfer payment agencies. And you're right that the ministry staff themselves are not clinical experts. I mean, we can't be. That's not our job. Our job is to be policymakers, and we do leave the clinical decision-making up to the experts who are in the programs themselves.
Do you not feel that you should be in line with the department that does deal with health issues, i.e. the Ministry of Health, when it comes to this? Because they would be considered the experts. So rather than relying on the private world out there, wouldn't it be best to align yourself with the Ministry of Health to come to derive standards of practice that will be followed by the regional providers, rather than letting the regional providers determine how they feel it is best to operate?
David, it's not for me, and you're a federal public servant. You're probably in a bit of the same position. It's not for me to say how the province should organize itself between 2 ministries. But I think the ministry feels that the best way to organize around the Autism Intervention Program is to, in fact, leave the funding of the program up to the clinical experts and not to public servants.
Well, this is what I mean, though. But you see, within the public service, your Department of Health, like our Department of Health, in fact, my own department employs quite a few doctors and nurses. Psychologists, I know, and I know the province does as well. Maybe not so much your ministry, but other ministries do. So, I know that reading some of your previous policy framework documents, that you are aligned with a few other departments when it comes to dealing with mental health issues and whatnot in the province of Ontario. And again, rather than relying on, I don't know how you guys work, but in the federal government, when Treasury Board comes along and states in policy that the sky is pink, in every department, the sky is pink. It could be dark pink in our department, it can be light pink over in somebody else's department, but it is still pink. So, having said that, if you're going to rely on 9 regions to set 9 different practices, standards of practice, then you're going to have skewed results when you finally do start doing evaluations. You're going to have to sit down and you're going to have to say, this is how things will be done across the province of Ontario, because once you guys ever get around to starting to evaluate this data that they are generating, it will have to be common across 9 regions. So you are going to have to define standards of practice. If you are not clinically capable, or I should say professionally or subject matter experts in that area, then you will have to find these experts who will tell you how you will set a standard of practice across the province. Otherwise, like I say, the data you collect will not be valid. So if you're going to rely on those people in the region to do what you think is right, you're going to be finding yourself in the same position again in a couple of years when somebody else asks the same question. You better do it right the first time, because I've been down this path in the federal government.
David, it's Susan here. There's 2 future things that the ministry is planning I wanted to talk to you about that I'm not sure you're aware of that may touch upon some of the points you just raised. So first of all, you may have heard, or again you may not have, that we're planning on setting up what's called an independent review mechanism for the Autism Intervention Program. Have you heard talk of that at all?
I've heard about that, yes.
Yeah. The plan is really to set up a mechanism where parents who disagree with a clinical decision made by their regional program with respect to a child's eligibility or discharge from the AIP would have an opportunity to make an appeal to the independent review mechanism. It's not set up yet. The province is working on it. And so I think that would sort of help parents, again, address when there's concerns or when they disagree with a decision made by a clinical decision maker relating to the child in AIP. And secondly, the ministry is also planning to set up something that we call an ASD Clinical Expert Committee. And that is really about making sure that there's a group of experts to advise the province in an ongoing and systematic way so that we have the latest, we have the benefit of the latest research on ASD and really so that the province can be advised on best practice and evidence-based practice and best clinical practice.
Yeah.
So recognizing that, we need to do some work in these areas, the province has committed to setting those 2 things up.
Yeah, as far as the independent panel for review, it depends on who's on the panel, of course, and who's paying the salaries. That will always be the question in the back of every parent's mind. Again, you have to remove yourself completely from the picture to show that you're completely independent of all decisions made, because if you do not, you will find parents saying that this is a farce. Again, I see. What I'm saying is, a lot of parents out there already feel that that the ministry says we leave it up to the clinicians to decide. We're not the professionals. Yet you pay the clinicians their salaries, either directly or indirectly. So the question then becomes a matter of ethics. Have they violated their ethical beliefs for the almighty dollar or fear of losing a job? If you remove yourself completely from the equation, you remove all suspicion. Again, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I know, the Ministry of Child and Youth Services only treats one medical condition, and that being the ASD. It's kind of suspect when you treat one. Autism is not a childhood disease; it's a lifelong disability. It gets shuffled from one ministry to the other. because my battle is far from over, because my next one is to start going after the Board of Education. I've found a few things in there that I suspect as well. But needless to say, you will have issue, you will continue to have issue until you remove yourselves completely from this process. An independent panel must be completely indirect. If you're paying any salaries on that board, then people will always wonder. And I know that's what's going to happen, because right now, when somebody, like I asked a question long ago to define 2 terms for me that were in the AIP guideline, and the response was, the Ministry of Child and Youth Services does not define these terms, as they are widely accepted clinical terms that are understood and used by clinical psychologists, blah, 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 blah. So, it would have been much easier just to turn around and say, here's what they mean in the medical community. Bang. But what this document tells me is, we're just going to pass the buck on this and say it's their problem over there. And you will get that from the public. I can tell you. I know. I've had to deal with a lot of the public. I have people ask me the most ridiculous questions, and I have to explain, our position. Even my friends ask me why. And I explain in the unofficial terms, how we work and how we operate and, why we do the things we do. Why policy? Why do I have to jump through all this paperwork to get this done? Well, paperwork is not there for you to jump through. Paperwork is there really to CYA my job. That's what it's there for. It's to protect the ministry. It's not there to cause you grief. Again, falling back on this, you must remove yourself from this process if you want to show that you are completely independent, because people like Perry and whatnot, if they are on this board, people are going to sit back, all the activist parents, and say it's a farce. But again,
So it's obviously a very complex issue, emotionally charged. But focusing on sort of what we can do in terms of under the Freedom of Information Act, a couple of things came up there that were of reference. So, Susan, you mentioned the academic references. That sounds like those would be maybe helpful documents for David. Are they talk about the Ontario experience or more worldwide? Or
They're specific to Ontario.
Okay. So I think
have them in front of me, and I haven't read them in a while, but they are, generally about Ontario.
that might. What do you think about that, David, in terms of at least getting the references for those? Would that?
Well, we have to take this a little bit further, because like I say, as long as the public purse is being used to pay these funds, the people who are receiving these funds have to be competent and able to do what is ethically right for the best interests of these kids. So if you're just going to turn around and say, here's some cash, go do it, without, I've got a PhD. Well, that's great. Where did you place in your class? Did you get a 4.0 average, or did you get a 1.9 grade point average? When it comes to surgery, I would think I'd want the guy who is actually really good with his hands and knows what he's doing, other than the guy who's practiced theory in front of a classroom in a university for 20 years. So again, you have to ensure, this is why I say, when you talk about quality of this program, it's not just the clinicians in here, it's the program as a whole. It has a business side, it has the clinical side, it has people, it has cash, it has process. That's the 3 bases of any project. And the thing is balancing them. Now, again, I haven't seen the best interest of the child being served in any of this so far, other than the fact that we've given out money. McGinty can stand back and say, we're doing all this weird and wonderful thing, but yet, I don't see the quality here. It's one thing to offer a service, it's the other thing to actually ensure that you're getting what you're paid for.
Or the clinical experts. Is it possible that those different groups might have access to some records that may be of interest to you?
Well, it's hard to say, because Miss Bisnaire, or Dr. Bisnaire, told me that she has always had great glowing evaluations from the ministry, yet the ministry doesn't seem to have any evaluations, so I don't know.
Sorry, can I interrupt you for a minute? I just want to clarify that the clinical expert committee that I referred to when I talking to David a bit about that. Doesn't exist yet.
Okay. So the committee doesn't exist, but I was wondering if the hands-on people had maybe some stats or charts that they keep themselves that, again, might be outside of the jurisdiction of your ministry. But if David made a request under the Ministry of Health or something along those lines. I'm just speculating, yes. I don't have a background in that, but I was just wondering as an option for David.
What?
Well, that bringing the focus back to our thing then in terms of what the likely outcomes are in terms of next steps on our side. I think the academic reference sounds like an interesting thing, but at the end of the day, David's going to have to make a decision in terms of how to proceed. Well, the one option is if after these discussions and maybe a more informal discussion directly with the people involved, does David accept that records don't exist in that format, so that under an FOI request there's nothing that can be provided? Are you satisfied with their explanation, David, or what's...
Well, it doesn't explain why they haven't been doing it. Why have you not been doing the evaluations in accordance with the guideline?
Again, it's something that our office might not be able to address, but I mean, you're free to ask the question.
Well, I'm asking the question of the ministry and those there. Why have you not been performing these evaluations, these systematic evaluations? Hold on. Let's get the quote correct. Systematic processes and outcome evaluation that are supposed to be done periodically by the ministry and the results reported. Obviously you haven't because there are no results to report. So why have we not been doing, or why have you not been doing this? That's the question.
Hi, David. It's Susan.
Yes.
I think it's fair to say in any program, and in this program as well, you could always do a bit better in your evaluation processes and procedures and, do more to understand outcomes for kids. And so I begin by saying that. But I do think that we do, through the processes that we use to gather data, both by way of financial data and monthly and quarterly service data, I mean, that's not nothing. We get pretty good information, some of which you saw in the quarterly reports that really do speak to numbers of kids in programs, how long they're waiting, and so forth and so on, that really do help us to understand what is going on in the program. And by virtue of the fact we have that data, it really does alert us to issues that are going on that we may want to address. So it's not nothing. It does tell us some important things about the AIP. Granted, it might not be everything that you or even we would want to have, but it is not nothing. And again, when we do service contracting every year, we're looking at how the service provider is doing in terms of compliance against the guidelines. And again, it's the routine monitoring of what the experts are saying about IBI that we are attuned to, and that does help us to keep our thumbs on the on what's going on and what outside of experts are saying about the efficacy of IBI.
Yeah, okay, but you still had 6 years to get this done, and none of what you provided me actually proves that you're providing a quality service for these kids. Again, I just want to add one more thing regarding the final assessments that I had raised issue about originally. I'd like you to know that I know of 2 parents who have asked for those final assessments and were declined. That one of them produced the paper that was put out by your ministry saying that final assessments must be done. It took 4 months to have that final assessment done. The other parent wasn't even informed. It seems that CHEO, I'm not speaking for the other regions or anybody else, but it would appear that CHEO is not making it publicly known that they actually do final assessments. But when they are confronted with doing it, they will do it reluctantly. Now, again, This is something simple. You don't need be a clinical expert to know whether or not the assessments are being done. It's a simple question. Are you doing what you're not supposed or not doing? Just because you have a piece of paper that said X number of kids went through the program doesn't mean everything that's required under their service level agreement is actually being done. So it's quite simple to go in and say, what are you doing? Here's the guidelines, The guidelines lay out a number of items in there. It's quite simple to go walk in the door and say, are you doing A? Are you doing B? Are you doing C? Are you doing E? You don't have to be a clinician to try to figure out, what the ABLES program is or anything like that. You just have to go in and say, are you doing final assessments? Great. How many have you done this quarter? Great. Thank you very much. How many children have dropped out of the program this month after 6 months, the 12-month, and the 24-month period? Because these are time frames that are in your document. Again, did they excel? We let them out early, or were they not meeting the? I can't say the word benchmark because you say you don't have them. So are they not meeting the curve, and they're out? These are simple stats that don't need clinical explanation, and they're quite easily. You could have been doing these for years, and they show quality of program. I mean, if 80% of the kids are getting dropped out of the program because they're not meeting the grade, then maybe ABA or IBI is not the best thing going. The ministry could make that determination just by, are we getting value for our money? You don't have to be a clinician, like I say. These are just simple quantitative figures that show program success. And when you can show program success, then you can say we have a quality program here because kids are exceeding. They're meeting the curve. A simple head count does not measure quality. Again, you had 6 years to do this. What you've done was not in the best interest of the children, in my opinion. Simple quantitative figures. Any statistician could have told you this. I've had statisticians look at the document. I've had buddies at work who are mathematical geniuses look at some of this stuff, and they're laughing at what they see. That's the beauty of working in the government. Where I work, I've got a wealth of resources available to me that I can call upon to look at any document I want. I work in a unique area, like I see. I've been working in 20 years doing what I do, and I see projects from conception right through to completion. I know every piece of paper that's produced. I see every email. I talk to everybody. And I have, like I say, a wealth of resources. And this documentation doesn't prove quality. Now, like I said, I've given you some simple solutions that you can start measuring against you determine what your key performance indicators for this project are supposed to be. You go back and look at those from the business aspect. I'm not asking you all to become psychologists. I'm just saying, let's go in, start measuring some numbers, and see how things are doing. Let's compare apples to oranges. Let's see what's happening over here, what's going over there. Simple numbers that can provide a lot of data. So again, I'm not happy with the way this has gone. That's my position on this. I'm not happy with the answers. To say you're going to do something is one thing. To actually do something is something else. A forward-facing program that affects the public, when a minister gets called, we all know what happens. Something internally, my email system doesn't work. I didn't get my vital email stats. I didn't get my documentation. Where's this? Where's that? Those are little problems we deal with internally. But Jesus Christ, when the minister walks through the door ranting and raving because his mother-in-law didn't get her old age security check, we got hell to pay. And this is a public forward-facing application or program, And I'm just one person. You've got 18,000 kids, just according to your paperwork, that have autism. To the politicians, that's 2 parents. That's 36,000 votes, plus their relatives and grandparents. The politicians don't like bad numbers. The politicians love numbers. They like to prove success. This does not. I'm sorry, but that's the way I see it.
We see that, David.
I'm
it brings
just
back to that, I guess, to our focus then in terms of what obviously our office can do, and what we look at is, did the ministry respond to the request within the parameters of the Act? And the issue that would be defined in this case is when someone makes a request and they're not satisfied, or they believe that additional records should exist, the issue before us is what we call reasonable search. what our office looks at, and our adjudicator will look at, is did the institution conduct a reasonable search to locate responsive records to the request. So the focus is pretty narrow on, and it focuses back to what the request is. So they look at what reasonable search, often our definition is not a specific definition, was did knowledgeable individuals that work in the appropriate areas take some time to reasonably look for the request. It's not even in some cases we don't. A reasonable search is an absolute guarantee that no documents exist anywhere, but did someone take a reasonable effort to find those records? So the question now becomes, in terms of moving forward from our aspect, is for David, if David, after hearing these explanations, accepts that this is a reasonable search, obviously he's not satisfied with more of the quantitative issues or what ought to be done, but was there a reasonable search for any documents? And by a record we mean sort of often a written document that's already been created that can be provided. David has to make that decision. If David's not satisfied, the file would move on to adjudication, where adjudicator would conduct an inquiry in writing on, but solely on, the focus would be on that issue. I guess you don't have to make a decision right now if you don't want to, David, but do you have a comment just on the appeal moving forward, or?
Well, like I say, if the documentation does not exist, then obviously the documentation does not exist. So I want an official statement stating the fact that it does not exist. Well, if the adjudicator is going to say that, okay, I'm satisfied that the documentation does not exist, then I guess I have to live with that. And if that's the case, so be it.
Are you saying the adjudicator or?
The adjudicator. If the adjudicator is satisfied that the documentation doesn't exist, then the documentation doesn't exist. Now, I'm not saying that it does exist. All I'm saying is I just need an official word saying that the documentation that I requested does not exist. Somebody has to be willing to make that statement.
But someone from the ministry, if the ministry puts something in writing?
If the ministry puts something in writing that's saying that the evaluated process, as per the API guidelines, that the evaluative process as per the API guidelines has not been performed and no documentation exists, I'd be happy with that too.
I'm not sure that's what they're saying, though. I think what they're saying is that no additional documents exist other than the ones they've provided.
That's right. So my request was for the evaluations from the 9 regional offices. They're saying they don't exist. So having said that, then an official statement saying exactly that they do not exist will satisfy me. Because that's what the request was for. If they don't exist, that's exactly what does not exist.
Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think maybe at this point then, I don't know if we'll come to a conclusion today. Maybe what we can do is leave it at that. I'll give you a call, maybe directly, David, maybe gives you back a call, Christina, and then take it from there in terms of letting people know what's the best way to follow up.
Yeah. Brian, I'm going to be heading into the office here in about 10 minutes. I'm sure my phone line at work is tied into a conference call and will be tied for the rest of the week. Yeah, you can call me on my cell. You have my cell phone number?
Yes.
Okay. And you can always get a hold of me on that number. So I guess that's, we can call this, bring this to an end today. I should say this.
Did you have any final comments, Susan, or?
No, I think we're good. I hope that helped explain a bit of the context and some of the next steps for the program, but I think those are good next steps for this call.
Okay, and I don't know, but for my interest, could those academic references be maybe sent to David or even to myself? That might.
Yes.
Mr. Christine, or just an email with
We'll send them to you, Brian.
Sure, that'd be great. again, thanks everyone for participating today. I mean, a number of people have set aside their time to discuss the issue. Obviously, an emotionally charged and complex issue. So I think that will wrap it up for today. I will talk to David, and I'll follow up with Christina on the next steps in our process.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye now.
Bye, David.
Ministry of Children and Youth Services.
Meeting over.